Focus then on the issues around COVID-19 and the restrictions to try and contain the spread. Many of the country's Christians want churches to be allowed to open again. And I said many. Religious gatherings are prohibited under the current level 4 lockdown. I'm joined now by Bishop Marothi Mashashane from the South African National Christian Forum. Bishop, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. So we know that the reasoning given for the restrictions, particularly on gatherings, which religious gatherings and church attendance and mosque attendance, etc., are, is that the virus doesn't move. It's the people that congregate and move the virus and cross-infect each other. The Delta variant, we've been told, spreads more easily than the previous Beta variant. Having seen the numbers and seen the realities that we're dealing with and where we are in the fight against the virus, what is your expectation of President Cyril Ramaphosa this evening?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having us. Our reaction, as we also addressed the President on our meeting last week, is that we do expect the President to relax the regulation and allow the religious gathering to continue. The reason being, though this virus moves with people, it is also much dependent on people's behavior. If people adhere to the precautions, the health precautions, we are of the view that the virus can be controlled, even to be handled. So in our position, we are saying the church has demonstrated in various ways ever since the beginning of this pandemic that the behavior of the church has been of a good conduct and of being a good example to other sectors. And therefore, it is really unnecessary and unfair for the church to always be a scapegoat when we're talking about the enforcement of the regulation. So there's no way that we can simply say life cannot move on because of the pandemic. The main thing is the behavioral way of handling it. We are living with it. We just have to know how to deal with it. And therefore, just like we are saying with the employment, the people cannot just be locked in their houses and not have an income. So the same applies with the churches and other institutions or sectors.
And Bishop, so when you are calling for, when you're saying that you believe that religious gatherings should be allowed to continue, at what level are we talking here in terms of capacity in any given church?
We are of the position that as South African National Christian Forum, we are representing almost 300 churches, being the small churches, the medium churches, and the mega churches. What we are advocating now is that all churches, including the mega churches, they need to be allowed for the gathering, as long as they will be complying. All churches, ever since the beginning of the pandemic, we advised them to have what we call compliance officers. Those are the people who make sure that the distancing is complied with. People are putting their mask, they check the temperature, people are sanitizing. I mean, it is really unfair and uncalled for if a church is having a space of 1,000 members, and then you're going to say to that church, then because of the pandemic, they must only allow 50 people. It really doesn't make sense. It was even better if it was 50% of the normal carrying capacity. That will be reasonable enough. And when you're looking at other industry sectors, like the taxis, the buses, the trains, They are putting 100% carrying capacity. The same people you are saying they cannot be in church, you allow them to sit shoulder to shoulder in a taxi. You allow them to go into a restaurant. You know, so it doesn't really make sense. So I am trying to say, irrespective of a mega church, a medium church, or a small church, all churches under any level, if for that reason we even saying to regulate the Christian gathering, it's even, you know, irrational and unconstitutional. Yesterday we heard of ANC speaking of RDP for the souls. So how do you do the RDP for the souls when you do not allow the churches to do their spiritual services?
Lastly, Bishop.
So that is our position. And we're really saying, irrespective of the size of the church.
Lastly, Bishop, what will you say to people who will say, you as a church, as churches, you are partly the architects of your own difficulties in that, I mean, twice you've said, if people adhere to precautions, the situation can be managed. You've also said, as long as people will be complying. Though I'd say to you, those are big ifs and a big as long as. What would you say to people who are saying, we couldn't trust you before the pandemic to, you know, nib in the bud those practices that were exploitative of people's beliefs that were being raised from time to time? How can we possibly trust you to have 1,000 people and adhere to all the regulations? How can we even begin to trust you as a church?
Let me firstly say, we're talking about the if. That simply means the possibility. But in this case, we've got a proven track record that churches, ever since this issue of pandemic started, they have been a good example to all other sectors. It is for that reason that even when all other sectors cannot be operate, but you're still saying funeral services can be handled in churches. You can still vaccinate people in churches. Right now we're talking of KZN having other schools that has been burned down or whatever case. Churches are now giving their buildings to say the education can continue and be conducted in the churches. So a church cannot be compared to any other thing like a tavern or whatever. The church is part of day-to-day life. It's part of the community. This cannot be separated to day-to-day living of human beings. We are talking about counseling. We're talking about, spiritual counseling. We're talking about prayers. We're talking about comfort. Under all that we have gone through, right. People have lost jobs, they need counseling. So it is the church. There's no way that a church can be separated from a human life.
All right, Bishop, thank you so much. I've got to thank you for your inputs there and spoken quite passionately there, Bishop Marothi Mashashane there from the South African National Christian Forum, weighing in on their expectations from President Cyril Ramaphosa's address to the nation later on this evening. This is Upfront on eNCA, and still to come.